Hi, welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications talk show produced by students for you. Hi, my name is Radesha Robinson. I'm a third-year student studying journalism, and our guest today is Nona Jones, a University of Florida CJC graduate who held leadership roles at Sunshine Broadcasting, Nationwide Insurance, GRU, and Meta. She's now the global ambassador of YouVersion. Hi, Nona. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
That's awesome. So, you earned your bachelor's degree in communications. What drew you to attend UF and study this field?
So what's funny is I actually started out here as a microbiology and cell science major. I wanted to be an oncologist because my father passed away from cancer when I was about 2. And so I wanted to cure the disease because I wanted other people to have their parents. And so I came to the University of Florida, microbiology and cell science major, loved what I was doing because I love science and math, but I did a research project during my second year with the National Institute of Health, and I had a physician at Shands who was my project sponsor. And I think he was a bit jaded. Like, he was an older gentleman, he'd been doing it for a long time, and he was like, "Why do you want to be a physician?" In this old, like, gruffy voice. And I said, "Because I want to give people hope, and I want to be a partner in their healthcare." And I just said this like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed thing, and he was like, "No, it's not what we do. It's about the science. It's about the data. We don't give people hope." And I was just like, let me change my major. So that's what made me change my major to communications, because I figured that if I couldn't be a physician, I love communications. So I was like, maybe I'll become a broadcast journalist. And so that's what brought me to the J School.
That's awesome. In 2002, you started working for Sunshine Broadcasting. How did you get that opportunity, and what did you do as the news director and community relations coordinator for that station group?
So that was one of those crazy opportunities because, of course, I was still a student here at UF. I somehow became friends with the station manager, and I'm trying to remember how that happened, because even though I was here at UF, I was still involved in the community outside of the university community, and that's rare. A lot of times students are only involved on campus, but I got involved with some organizations outside of campus. And so I think I met the station manager at one of the organizational meetings I was at, and he felt like I had a good voice and I was presentable, and he was like, "You know, did you ever think about doing news during like a morning radio show?" I was like, "Of course not." Like, no, that's not what I thought. But he offered me the opportunity, and what I would do is, for the first probably 2 or 3 months, I would do it live. I would go in at like 5:30 in the morning, and I would basically share the most important news, local, state, and national, during the drive time. I think it was the Tom Joyner morning show that I was speaking during. And then I figured out how to pre-record. So I didn't have to get up first thing in the morning. I could just record the news at night and have it air in the morning. And so that's what I got to do for, I think, a couple of years. And it was a really character building experience.
That's good. Add experience to your resume. That's nice.
Yeah. It was like real world experience. It was great.
In 2005, you became a community relations manager at Nationwide Insurance. How was that role different than community relations for a radio broadcaster?
Okay, so before I even share about that, I have to tell a very personal story. So, like, we're sitting here in the College of Journalism, and my 4th year, I think it was my 4th year, I auditioned to anchor the, like, I think 5 o'clock news or something that we would put together on PBS. I auditioned to anchor it. And I thought I didn't make it because I looked at the list that was published. Back then, we printed out the list. It wasn't like emailed. It was like, here's the list. And I didn't see my name on the list. And so I was like, well, I guess I didn't make it. And so that's when I applied to start working at Nationwide Insurance as like a customer service representative. So it was like a part-time role. Well, I went back a couple weeks later because even though I wasn't anchoring the news, I was, of course, still a student. So I was helping to produce it. And I just happened to look at the list again. And I actually did get selected as an anchor. Somehow I missed it. But I honestly believe that was like divine providence, because with me starting to work at Nationwide Insurance, that's what placed me on a corporate executive track. And so I started to become a community relations manager, and I started to manage like the corporate philanthropy of the company. So giving out money, representing the company at conferences and events. And that was very different than community relations coordination at the broadcast station, because we didn't have no money to give out. We didn't have any money to give out. And the role that I played there was just keeping on top of what was happening in the community so I could report on it. Whereas in the corporate setting, I was actually investing on behalf of the company in the community.
Wow, that's awesome. So while working at Nationwide, you pursued your master's degree in business administrations. Was it challenging to juggle work and academics at that time? And why did you seek a business degree?
Well, so at that time, I'd already graduated. So I had my bachelor degree and I was done with that. What essentially happened was a year after I graduated, I was already in like this entry-level independent contributor role at Nationwide. My role, the community relations manager role, was created, and that was a leadership role, and it placed me on the regional leadership team. And so I was like 23 on this team with all these executives, and I would be in meetings where we're reviewing, budget reports, and we're reviewing profit and loss statements and all of these things that I did not understand. I had never seen that before. I didn't know anything about business strategy. I didn't know anything about expenses and revenue and all that. And so what essentially happened was, because I was at that table and I didn't understand what they were talking about, I figured I needed to get a business understanding, some sort of business degree. And that's what made me decide to go back for my Master of Business Administration. And so I think it was challenging for sure, because I had a full-time job. I went back in 2006. But it was probably one of the most important investments that I've made, because, now I've held multiple senior executive roles at multiple large corporations. And not only do I have my communications background, which I think communication is the most important competency for a leader. So not only do I have that, but I also understand how businesses run and operate and how to scale and grow.
So did you know what you wanted to do with that business degree?
I think I knew that I wanted to stay on the executive track. And so my thinking was that I would get that degree and that I would have just progressively increasing responsible roles. So I knew that if I was in a director role, I could get to a VP, from a VP to the C level. And eventually I wanted to become a CEO. That was my goal at that time. But yeah, the business degree, I knew I needed it because I had to understand how businesses functioned. And frankly, I tell anybody, I feel like an MBA is the most horizontally applicable type of degree, because no matter what industry you're in, it is a business.
That's good. So you wanted to lead and be a leader?
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah. I can see that. In 2008, you became the Community and Government Relations Director for Gainesville Regional Utilities. What inspired you to move into the public sector, and what were your responsibilities in that role? Oh,
great question. So at the time, I didn't realize that GRU was public sector. I kind of knew that it was like city owned, but I didn't realize that it was actually a governmental agency. And so the reason why I was interested in the role is because it was like the next level in my career. So I was already a community relations manager. This became a community relations director role that started out just community relations. And so what that meant was strategies to make sure that the utility was responsive to our customer base, strategies to ensure that the utility was giving back to the community. I had a team that had all types of programs to support our customers who were having financial challenges and difficulties. I would say within about a year and a half, though, one of my colleagues who was responsible for our federal legislative agenda, he decided to retire. Now, this was someone who had like 40 years of experience in environmental policy, energy regulation, which is highly complex. But he said to my boss, the CEO, he said, I think this is something that Nona could do. She's, very well spoken. She seems to pick things up really quickly. And me being naive, I was like, of course I can do federal environmental policy. Like, that's no big deal. I had no idea how complicated it would be, but it was the best experience of my life because I learned how to make complex things very simple in order to understand it for myself. And so I eventually grew into that kind of public policy side, but I was initially community relations. So it eventually became community relations and public policy. And in that role, I did everything from, carbon credits regulation to making sure the utility was in line with federal, state policy, local policy as well. It was a very, very learning experience.
So having been at GRU for 6.5 years, what were some of your biggest accomplishments?
Well, one of my biggest accomplishments is I was recognized by the American Public Power Association as a rising star. So there's this award that's given to a utility executive under the age of 30 that recognizes their impact in the industry and the profession. I was shocked to have been given that award. And the reason why I was given that award is I was also nominated and elected as president-elect for the Florida Municipal Electric Association, which is basically the governing body for government-owned utilities. And so I was, I think, maybe 27, 28 at the time when I was elected to that role. So those were two things that were really important and unexpected, but really important, I think, successes. We also did a lot of things in the community. I think, you know, given your age, you may not know this yet, but y'all, utilities are expensive. And so people don't normally like their utility company. And so my job was to try to create programs that allowed us to kind of have a positive working relationship with people who didn't like us. And so there were several town halls that I was able to host that, even though it didn't necessarily make people like us, it increased our accessibility to our customers, and people really appreciated that. So there was that. And the last thing I would mention is under my tenure, we started a program that is still continuing today called the Brighter Tomorrow Scholarship Program. And so it provides scholarships for inspiring and aspiring engineering students here in the city of Gainesville. And so that's still continuing today.
That's good. I can see that you like giving back to the community.
Absolutely,
That's really good. Across your career, were there any challenges stepping into leadership roles as young as you did, or as a Black woman?
So, I would say I could write a book on this, but I already did. It's called Success from the Inside Out. Yes, I faced a lot of challenges because here's the thing, like, I got into my first leadership role when I was 23. And again, I did not have a business background. I had never been around leadership at that level. I was in leadership at the University of Florida, of course. I was leading student organizations. But leading students is way different than leading like professionals. And so I think I entered into those leadership roles just naively, assuming that if I say we're doing this, that's what's going to be done. But there were people who had years more experience than me that I was now leading, and they didn't agree with me. And so one of the, I think the most important lessons that I learned is that as a leader, I don't care how much experience you have to build consensus with your people. Like, yes, you make a decision, you are the decision maker, but you have to honor the experience of the people who have been there before you, actually seek their input, their feedback, so that you have more context, so that your decision is the optimal decision, not just your opinion. And so that was one of the most important lessons that I learned. I think as a Black woman, I've definitely experienced some challenges where I would say in all of my career, I was usually the only Black woman in the room. I was the only Black woman in a leadership role. And so sometimes I would get left out of social events. I would find out that they happened after the fact. And the thing about social events is that's where relationships are built and forged. And so, you know, colleagues would maybe have really good working relationships, and I would just kind of feel like I was on the outside looking in because I wasn't invited. And then there were times when I do feel like people's expectation of me was lower than my capability. And so they were often surprised that I actually had an opinion that made sense.
Yeah, and it made you want to like prove them wrong.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, it's just I showed up as who I am, and who I was to them was shocking. Like, wow, you actually are smart and you can string some words together. So yeah, I've experienced that too. But I will say by and large, I have had such a blessed career. I've been very, very fortunate to work for some great companies and some great roles with some great teams.
That's good. That's awesome. So in 2014, you left GRU to work in Jacksonville as Chief External Affairs Officer for the nonprofit PACE Center for Girls. What is PACE, and how were you able to make an impact there? So
PACE, first of all, is just so near and dear to my heart. We don't have time to talk about it, but I had a very tumultuous childhood. A lot of trauma, a lot of dysfunction. And what PACE does is PACE works with girls who have experienced all types of trauma, abuse. Many of them are system involved, whether it's, adoption, whether it's, all types of things. But what PACE does is it provides counseling services, educational services in centers located throughout the state of Florida, kind of like an alternative school environment, specifically for girls. And it also provides wraparound services for the families. And so what I did in my role is I was responsible for marketing and branding for the organization's actual whole, I guess, external image in the world. I was also responsible for resource development, so raising money, private public sector funding as well, corporate funding. We were also responsible for government affairs, so at the state level and the federal level, and then program expansion. So when I started in the role, we were only in Florida, but we had aspirations to become a national organization. And so my team's responsibility was to find ways to scale the organization outside of Florida.
That's awesome. So you're a respected voice in juvenile justice reform, keynoting former AG Eric Holder's National Youth Violence Prevention Summit and the UN's Girl Up International Summit. What importance does this topic mean to you?
It means so much to me because I think people tend to walk into the successful chapter that my life is on and they think that's the whole story. But as I just alluded to, I had a very tumultuous childhood. And there's a study, it's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment. What it does is it looks at children and the types of trauma they experienced, and it gives the probability that a given child will either end up, premature death, incarceration, drug addiction, etc. The way the assessment works is it's on a scale of 0 to 10. And a child that scores a 3 is considered at high risk for some sort of adverse outcome in life. Well, when I took the test, I scored an 8. And so I should either be in jail, dead, system involved, something. But I am sitting here, and the way I like to describe it is I'm a statistically improbable product of God's grace. Mm-hmm. Like, I am sitting here as a testament to just redemption. And so the reason why juvenile justice matters to me is because I could have and should have been them. I should have been the child in the juvenile delinquent center. I should have been the child who was drug dependent, et cetera. And so when I see a kid who is acting out and behaving in what we call inappropriate ways, mm-hmm. instead of being like, what's wrong with them? The question I ask is, what happened to them? Because there's something that happened that led to that behavior. And so that's why that's so important to me, and that's why I speak on it, because it's my story.
Yeah. So in 2017, mm-hmm. you went to work for Meta, formerly Facebook, as Director of North America Community Partnerships and Faith Global. Mm-hmm. How did that opportunity come to be?
So to make a very long, crazy story short, I got a call one day from a woman on my cell phone. It was a 650 area code. I thought it was a telemarketer. It just said San Francisco, California. And she just asked, she was like, hey, is this Nona Jones? I said, yes. And she said, I'm calling from Facebook. And I was like, Facebook doesn't call people. Who is this? And she was like, no, really, I'm calling from Facebook. And she proceeded to tell me that apparently this was in April. She told me that in February of that year, Mark had changed the mission of the company to focus on community building. And he wanted the company to serve the faith community globally because it was like the largest community on earth. And he realized, though, that there would need to be kind of specialized expertise in order to do that. And the company, I would say about 80% of employees in the tech sector in general are either atheist or agnostic. And so he knew that he needed someone who kind of understood faith and actually was a person of faith. So anyway, I got a call out of the blue telling me about this role and inviting me to consider joining the team there. And so that's how it came about.
So what were your responsibilities at Meta?
They were varied, but I think primarily, so when you think about Meta, as it is now, it was Facebook then, it is actually a family of apps. My team's responsibility was essentially to help the people who were using these apps to find community. Because what we wanted ultimately is we didn't want people to have this like individual isolated experience. Like you go on Facebook and you're just scrolling endlessly. We wanted people to actually join communities and have conversations. So similar on Instagram, we want people to find communities, find belonging, have conversations. And so our responsibility was to help get people in community, work with our engineering and our product design organization so that they would build the features and the functionality to help people get into community. And then when it comes to faith specifically, my team worked with some of the largest organizations serving the faith community around the world to make sure that they understood how to use the tools to find and build community on our platforms.
It sounds like your time at Meta allowed you to blend your expertise. What are social ministries and how is technology changing how people engage with their faith? So,
great question. I wrote a book called From Social Media to Social Ministry, and I wrote it because as my team was working with communities of faith around the world, what we were finding is there was kind of a very unique opportunity for communities of faith in particular, because there are very few types of communities where you have an actual like built-in meeting time, like cadence, where it's on a weekly basis, sometimes a daily basis, sometimes multiple times throughout the day. And so the concept of social ministry is about using digital technology to actually meet the needs of people, to inspire hope in them, to encourage them. And so our goal was, and through that book, the goal was to really empower leaders of faith to serve their communities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even if they don't have a physical space to meet in.
In 2023, you left Meta and became Chief Content and Partnership Officer for YouVersion. What is the mission of this company and what did your day-to-day look like?
Great question. So YouVersion is similarly a family of apps. One of the most popular apps is the Bible app. And so there's about, 2,000 translations of the Bible in there, like 3,000 languages or something like that. So the mission of YouVersion as an organization is to encourage and challenge people to seek intimacy with God every day. And so the technology itself becomes a platform to just help people do that with ease. And the role that I played is, whenever you open up the Bible app, it's essentially a content experience. So there are Bible plans, there are videos, there's an experience called what we call daily refresh. And so it has like guided scripture and guided prayer. And so what my team does is my team will source the content for every experience in the app, work with partners to source that content, secure that content, and then structure it so that it's a meaningful experience for people. And the team is also a global team. And so not just in North America, but serving people literally all over the world. And so my team is responsible for that.
Your career is already impressive, but you've also written multiple books. Tell us about From Social Media to Social Ministry, Success from the Inside Out, and Killing Comparison.
Yes. So one of the most, I think, fun but very laborious parts of my life is I am an author. And so I talked a little bit about From Social Media to Social Ministry earlier. It's really like a guide to what I call digital discipleship. This idea of, how do you help people find and build communities of faith on social platforms? And so that's what From Social Media to Social Ministry is about. My book, Success from the Inside Out, is kind of my memoir where I talk about the importance of pursuing what's called good success. So there is a section of the Bible, there's a story, a book called Joshua in the Bible, and it comes right after the book of Deuteronomy. And most people have heard of Moses. Well, Moses was like, the leader of the Israelites. Well, he dies. And then in the book of Joshua, this new leader, this young leader rises up. And there's a period of time where, God speaks to him. And in Joshua 1:8, he said something. He said to Joshua, meditate in the law day and night, observe to do everything it commands. Then you will make your way prosperous and you will have good success. When I read that idea of good success, it was so perplexing to me because I think we think success is good just by definition, right? Like, of course, success is good. You achieved what you set out to achieve. But there are times when I think you can achieve success and feel overwhelmed and frustrated. You can feel anxious. I don't think that's good success. Yes, you may have achieved what you set out to achieve, but it wasn't good. So Success from the Inside Out is really about what I learned about how to experience good success, how to experience peace and joy in the pursuit of what you're pursuing. And I talk about my experience, my trauma, how to heal from that too. Killing Comparison is one of my favorite books because I talk about just insecurity and the insecurity that arises when we see somebody else's success as our failure. When we compare, ourselves to other people. And I wrote the book because I had an experience right around the beginning of the pandemic. I had a full calendar of speaking engagements. And of course, the pandemic canceled everything. But I went on to Instagram one day and I noticed that a friend of mine made a post about this women's conference she was speaking at. And I saw the post and I was like, oh, that sounds cool, And I kept scrolling and there were more friends that said they were speaking at this conference. Well, I knew all the speakers. I knew the host. I was a speaker. So I was like, why wasn't I invited to speak? And so I started to click on their profiles to figure out how many followers they had in comparison to me. I clicked on their websites. Where else were they speaking at in comparison to me? And I started doing all this comparison calculus to try to figure out why her, not me? Why wasn't I good enough? And I think through that process, I realized that I'd become insecure. I was insecure because I was taking my sense of worth and identity from where I kind of sat on the continuum of other people's success. So Killing Comparison is really a toolbox on how to deal with insecurity and how to get free from the tendency to compare ourselves to other people.
So you have your own ministry at Open Door Ministries here in Gainesville, and you're on the board of Christianity Today magazine and GRU. What role does faith play in your life?
My faith is everything to me because I did not grow up in a Christian home. I didn't know anything about the Bible, God, Jesus, church, none of that. And so while I was experiencing all types of abuse, I'm an only child, and so I was experiencing all types of abuse, it wasn't until a friend of mine invited me to church that I was suddenly in a community of people who were so kind to me and loving and just accepting and welcoming. And I think that's where I started to experience healing and restoration. And that's what I want to be to other people. So even at our church, we have people at our church that come from all types of backgrounds. You know, we have people at our church who are struggling with, drug addiction and alcoholism. We have people at our church who are on the brink of divorce, people who just got married, all of that. But they know that they are loved at our church. And that to me is why faith matters, is so that people know that you are loved and there's a place for you in the world.
That's awesome. Lastly, do you have any advice for young professionals just starting out and still trying to figure out their purpose?
Yes, I would say, and this is going to sound strange, but read everything. When you get into your career and people send you pre-reads for meetings, read it. Because you would be surprised how much power you have just by knowing what's going on. There have been so many meetings I've showed up to where nobody's read the materials. And so the people who make the decisions are the ones who know the materials. So I would say, show up to the meetings prepared, read everything, and adopt a practice of actually investing in your intellectual horsepower. So whatever industry you find yourself in, learn as much as you can about it. And not even just that industry, just make it a habit of just reading in general. I try to read a book a week when I'm not writing my own books. And the reason I do that is because there's so much information out there and there's just so much that you can learn. You'd be surprised. You don't always need a mentor. Sometimes you just need a book. Yeah. And so read everything, show up to meetings prepared so that you can actually have an informed opinion about the direction that things go in.
Thank you for your insight today, Nona. I really am inspired by you, and I'm taking it all in. Thank you so much. And thank you to our viewers for joining us tonight. Until next time, good night.